In this lesson, we're continuing our discussion of the essential elements of almost all crimes. Specifically, in this lesson, we need to focus on the third essential element, which of course is the concurrence requirement. Right, so if you remember at this point, we've talked about the two major essential elements, right? The actus reus requirement and the mens rea requirement. Of course, the actus reus requirement is that external feature of crime, right? It's whether the defendant committed a voluntary physical act, right? Most of the time. We saw sometimes an omission could constitute an actus reus, but most of the time we're looking for that voluntary physical act, right? But remember, we said that most of the time, right, a voluntary physical act alone is not enough to convict somebody of a crime. We also need that culpable mental state, right? And remember, we talked about all the different types of mental state requirements, but ultimately, depending on what type of crime we have, right, there has to be that culpable mental state, that guilty mind, right? What we refer to as the internal feature of crime, right? The third essential element really just combines these two and says, hey, look, the actus reus and the mens rea have to exist concurrently, right? The idea is that the defendant's requisite mental state must have existed at the time the voluntary act or omission took place, right? We need that overlap of that concurrence of the actus reus and mens rea. Right? In other words, a person is not guilty of a crime if the mens rea of an offense exists before or after, but not during the commission of the actus reus of the offense. Right? This is really referring to what we call temporal concurrence. It's really the timing aspect, right? We need the actus reus and the mens rea to exist at the same point in time, right? We can't have the actus reus come before the mens rea or the mens rea come before the actus reus. We need them to exist at the same point in time. And also, right, the impelling force or motivation behind the act that causes the social harm must be the mens rea of the offense, not some other thought process. We call this motivational concurrence, right? And we'll talk about that at the end of this lesson. But we can start with temporal concurrence, right? The idea of timing, right? And the best way to explain this is probably just to work through some examples. I think as we work through some examples, this will become more clear. So we can start with a really basic, straightforward example. Right, let's say we have two spouses, a husband and wife. And let's say that the wife wants to kill her husband, right? The wife is going to plan a way to kill her husband. Let's say that the wife is going to wait for her husband to come home from work, and as soon as he comes through the door, her plan is to shoot him with a gun and kill him, right? That's her plan, right? So she has this intent to kill her husband, right? And let's say for weeks she plans this, she rehearses it, right? And on these charts, right, what we have is the blue represents the mens rea and the red represents the actus reus, right? So let's say for this period of time, right, we have the wife planning how she's going to kill her husband, right? She's getting this intent to kill, right? What the mens rea would be. And let's say that our crime in question here is murder with an intent to kill, right? Let's say in this jurisdiction, right, we have a statute that says murder is the killing of another human being with the intent to kill, right? So the mental state requirement as defined in the definition of the offense is intent to kill, right? Nothing else. To have the mens rea necessary for this crime, right, we have to have the intent to kill. Right, so let's say during, the first 2 weeks of the fact pattern, the wife develops this intent to kill, right? And she kind of plans out how she's going to do it, and she comes up with the plan we laid out, right? She's going to wait for her husband to come home. As soon as he comes in through the door, she's going to shoot him, right? So let's say she executes this plan to perfection, right? One day the husband comes home, as soon as he opens the door, she shoots him, she kills him, right? He dies, and then after he dies, she's really happy with herself, right? She's happy with the result. She has no remorse, right? Her intent to kill never ends. Even after the death of the victim, the husband, her intent to kill remains, right? She's happy with it. That mens rea never disappears. Right, well in that case, do we have temporal concurrence? Right, well the question's going to be, at the time the voluntary act that takes place that constitutes the crime, right, which in this case would be pulling the trigger on that gun, right, that's going to be our voluntary act that constitutes the actus reus of the crime. At that time, when she's pulling the trigger, does she have the requisite mental state, right? At that time, does the defendant have the requisite mental state at the time the voluntary act or omission took place? And the answer is going to be yes, right? We have a clear overlap. When she's pulling that trigger, she has the intent to kill, right? So when she pulled the trigger, right, when she committed the voluntary act, she also had the intent to kill. Temporal concurrence is clearly satisfied, right? At this point, we would say that the person is guilty because the mens rea, right, of the offense existed both before and during and after, right? It was there the whole time, right? Her mens rea, that intent to kill, existed before the crime. It existed after the crime, but the key is, it existed before the actus reus, after the actus reus, but the key is it existed, right, that mens rea existed during the commission of the actus reus. When she pulled the trigger, she had the intent to kill. So this would be our most obvious example of temporal concurrence, right? She has the intent to kill the whole time, right? So of course we have overlap with the actus reus. Let's change this fact pattern a little bit. Same idea, right? Let's say husband comes home, he comes through the door, wife pulls out the gun, shoots him, but he doesn't die on the spot, right? Let's say he goes to the hospital, right? He's wounded really bad, but he doesn't die. Let's say 3 months later, he ends up dying from the gunshot wound, right? But let's say during that 3 months, immediately after this wife shoots her husband, she immediately regrets her decision. She's very remorseful. For those 3 months, she comes to the hospital every day. She's bringing flowers. She's very remorseful. Clearly, her intent to kill has ended immediately after she pulls the trigger, right? So same situation. For weeks, she plans how she's going to kill. She has this intent to kill. She pulls the trigger of the gun with the intent to kill, but immediately thereafter, she no longer has the intent to kill during this time period on, right? In that situation, do we have temporal concurrence? And the answer again is going to be yes, right? At the time she pulls the trigger, she has the intent to kill, right? At the time the actus reus that constitutes that crime, right? The killing of another human being. At the time she's pulling that trigger, right? She has the intent to kill, right? So the actus reus and mens rea exist at the same time, right? There is a temptation sometimes to focus on not when the voluntary act occurs, but to focus on when the death occurs, right? But if we look at our third essential element, right, we see it's whether the defendant's requisite mental state existed at the time the voluntary act took place. It's not did the mental state exist at the time the victim died, right? It's did the requisite mental state exist at the time the voluntary act that constitutes the actus reus of the crime took place. And the voluntary act that constitutes the actus reus of the crime here is pulling the trigger, right? The killing of another human being. It's pulling the trigger, right? So when she pulls the trigger, did she have the mental state requirement? And in this example, it would be yes. We have clear overlap between her intent to kill when she pulled the trigger, shot her husband, she had the intent to kill. That would be murder with the intent to kill, right? Okay, let's move to another one. Let's change the fact pattern again and see what we can come up with here. Let's say it's the same thing, right? For weeks, our wife plots to kill her husband. She has an intent to kill her husband, right? But let's say at some point after she has this intent to kill her husband, she changes her mind, right? Maybe the husband and wife have a big reconciliation, they come back together, and she no longer wants to kill her husband, right? Well, let's say the next day after her intent to kill ends, right, she and her husband go on a quail hunt, right? And they're walking through the woods. The wife sees a quail fly by and she wants to shoot it. She does so, but accidentally misses the quail and hits her husband, and her husband dies, right? Is she liable for murder? Right, well, the question is going to be, do we have concurrence? At the time she pulls the trigger, did she have the intent to kill her husband? Right, and we're not asking about, whether or not there might be some other type of murder. We're saying, is she liable for murder with the intent to kill? Right, there could be other things like criminal negligence, right? We're not worried about that. We're asking for the mens rea of the offense of murder with the intent to kill. Right? Did she have the intent to kill when she pulled the trigger? Right? And the answer there is going to be no, right? She had an intent to kill. It existed at one point in time, right? She had that mens rea requirement, but it ended before the actus reus took place. So in that example, we would not have temporal concurrence. She would not be liable for murder with the intent to kill because her intent to kill ended before the voluntary act that constitutes the actus reus of the crime took place, right? So next we can move to what happens if the act, so obviously this would be the situation where the mens rea precedes the actus reus, but we can also have the actus reus precede the mens rea, right? So this would actually be a pretty classic fact pattern with burglary, right? You see this tested all the time with burglary. So let's switch it up and do a burglary example because that's where you'd most often see this tested. Right, so let's say that we have a homeless person, right, and it's freezing cold outside, right, and remember, the elements for common law burglary are going to be the breaking and entering into the dwelling of another at nighttime with the intent to commit a felony in the dwelling, right, those are our elements to common law burglary. Right, well, let's say that we have a homeless person, right, and it's really cold outside. So this homeless person is seeking shelter and he finds a dwelling and say it's at nighttime, right? So he's going to break into and enter this dwelling of another at nighttime, but he's doing so with the intent to just get warm, right? Say he's really cold, he just wants to get warm. He doesn't have the intent to commit a felony inside the house. Right, let's say that he just wants to go in to warm himself up. Right, well, let's say that once he gets into the house, right, he sees something that's valuable, say he sees a diamond ring sitting there right inside the door, and now he has an intent to steal that diamond ring once he gets inside and sees it sitting there, right, on a table in the entryway. Right, well, is he liable for common law burglary? Right, and the answer is going to be no because the concurrence requirement is not satisfied, right? So the actus reus of the burglary is going to be the breaking and entering of the dwelling of another at nighttime. So he satisfies all the actus reus requirements when he kicks down that door and enters into the dwelling at nighttime, right? The actus reus is complete at that point in time. Maybe 2 seconds later, he now develops the intent to steal jewelry, right? Well, that intent to steal did not exist at the time that he broke and entered into that house. At the time the actus reus that constitutes the crime of common law burglary took place, he did not have the requisite mental state. He did not have that intent to commit a felony inside the dwelling, right, when he entered into the house. That came later. So he would not be liable for common law burglary because the temporal concurrence requirement is not met. Of course, right, would he be liable for common law larceny, right, the taking and carrying away of the personal property of another by trespass with the intent to permanently deprive the owner of their property? Right, well, at that point, right, what would we have? Right, so he breaks into the house to stay warm, but once he's inside, right, he decides to steal this diamond ring that's sitting there. Well, let's say that he takes the diamond ring. The next thing he does is he takes the diamond ring, right? So he takes the diamond ring and then he carries the diamond ring away, right? Say he carries the diamond ring away and say he has the intent to steal that diamond ring. You know, he's not just borrowing it or something, he's actually taking it to permanently deprive the owner, right? Well, at that point, we would have concurrence of a different crime, right? We would have concurrence for larceny. So he could be liable for larceny, he could not be liable for burglary. And that's only the difference is, right, temporal concurrence. Right, for the burglary, the actus reus is completed, then he gets this intent to steal later, right? So because there's no overlap, right, the concurrence element is not satisfied. He's not liable for burglary. But of course, right, at the same time that he's taking and carrying away that personal property of another by trespass, right, he does have that intent to permanently deprive, right? So he has the intent to steal when he's taking and carrying the property away. We would have concurrence for larceny, not for burglary, right? Hopefully that makes sense. This is a classically tested criminal law fact. Thank you so much for watching this video preview of our Legal Education Accelerator Program, or LEAP for short. If you would like to see the conclusion of this video and gain full access to our entire 1L and 2L video library, integrated outlines, streamable audio versions, additional practice exams with explanations, and much more, we invite you to head over to our website and join the thousands of law students who have already enrolled. To get started with your no-risk free trial today, simply click the link in the description box below or visit www.studicata.com/leap.
Hi everyone, my name is Serena and I'm currently a law student at South Texas College of Law, Houston.
Hi everybody, my name is Shiva and I'm currently a law student at Southwestern.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle and I am a first year student at South Texas College of Law, Houston. I used the Studicata study video series last semester to help me prepare mostly for contracts, and I actually made an A+ in contracts last semester, which I greatly dedicate to the Studicata videos.
By using Studicata to help me prepare for my final exam, I was able to score the highest grade out of my class on the final and even have my essay distributed as the model answer. Not to mention I had done quite poorly on the midterm and was struggling throughout the whole course of the semester, understanding the material and keeping up with lectures.
Because of the Studicata video lectures, I was able to go into my exams with a feeling of confidence. I didn't have to worry about what the rules of law were or how I was going to organize my answer to an essay question.
I would absolutely recommend the Studicata series and their online course materials to anyone. I think that they are not like professor lectures that you might find online or other outside study materials that you may encounter. I think that the Studicata videos really focus on not only ensuring that you understand the material that you're going to encounter on your final, but they also help you to understand kind of the best method for test taking, and they really break down how to approach each problem and the best ways to tackle certain methods on testing, and I think that's really important, and I think it's really special. I don't see that anywhere else in any of the other online resources that I've found. So I would certainly recommend Studicata to anyone who is studying in law school right now. Good luck on your studying, and you're going to do great.
I would definitely recommend Studicata to anybody watching this video. Give it a chance. I'm positive that you will love it, that you will get a lot out of it, and that you will be happy that you gave it a chance. I definitely am. I know I will be using Studicata in the future.
And I cannot thank Studicata enough for getting me through my first semester of law school. I will definitely continue to watch the Studicata video lectures throughout my law school career, and I highly recommend that any future or current law student do the same.